The dawn broke over Camp Haverford with the crisp clarity of a military reveille. Sunlight sliced through the morning mist, casting sharp shadows across the parade grounds, where the rhythmic thud of boots and the hum of engines mingled with barked commands. American flags snapped in the breeze, their stars gleaming against the pale sky. At the edge of the base, nestled among squat brick buildings, the commissary hummed with early activity. Inside, Lena Caldwell, 58, moved with quiet purpose, her presence almost spectral in the bustling order of the place. She was both part of this world and apart from it, her posture still carrying the steel of decades past, though her left knee betrayed a faint hitch with each step, a silent scar from years long buried. Lena's faded navy blue field jacket hung loosely on her frame, its cuffs threadbare, the fabric worn thin at the shoulders. Once a deep indigo, it had faded to a muted gray, the ghost of a unit patch barely discernible above her heart. She wore it not for warmth, but as a tether to a life few could fathom. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver, was pulled into a tight braid, and her hazel eyes scanned the aisles with practiced efficiency. The commissary's sliding doors hissed open, and she stepped inside, the cool air sharp with the scent of polished floors and fresh coffee. Young families pushed carts piled with groceries, retirees swapped stories near the bakery, and soldiers in crisp uniforms grabbed protein bars and energy drinks. Lena plucked a wire basket from the stack and navigated the aisles, her movements deliberate. From her jacket pocket, she retrieved A's creased shopping list, her fingers brushing a faint scar on her left forearm as she scanned the shelves for canned vegetables. Money was tight. Her pension claims were mired in red tape, tied to missions that officially never happened. She compared prices with the precision of someone who'd learned to stretch every dollar. In the aisle over, two young lieutenants in starched uniforms lingered near the snack section. Their voices carried, low but sharp. "You see the new gear allocations for the exercise?" The taller one, Lieutenant Bryce, asked, his insignia catching the fluorescent light. "Not yet," replied Lieutenant Harrow, his eyes flicking to Lena. A smirk tugged at his lips. "Speaking of outdated, check out that jacket. Looks like it's been through a war and a half." Lena's gaze remained fixed on a can of green beans, her expression unreadable, though her grip on the basket tightened slightly. "Probably dug it out of her dad's attic," Bryce muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "Vietnam surplus, bet you anything." Harrow chuckled. "More like a thrift store special. Discount rack, final sale." Lena placed two cans in her basket and moved to the pasta aisle, her pace steady. The lieutenants trailed at a distance, their conversation shifting back to supplies, but punctuated with glances her way. When she reached for a box of macaroni, her sleeve rode up, revealing more of the scar, a jagged line that spoke of violence long past. Her right shoulder stiffened, a dull ache flaring as she stretched. The doctors had warned her the damage was permanent, but Lena had made peace with her limits years ago. "Think she's for real?" Harrow whispered, his tone skeptical. "Or just playing the part? You know, like that guy last month who swore he was Delta but couldn't even pass basic." Bryce snorted. "Hard to tell. Everyone's got a story these days." Lena's fingers closed around the macaroni, her knuckles whitening briefly before she placed it in her basket. As she adjusted her sleeve, a small, faded photograph slipped partway out of her pocket. She tucked it back quickly, but not before a glimpse of four figures in desert camo, faces obscured by gear, standing beside a helicopter with no visible markings. The memory it held was hers alone, a night of sand and gunfire, erased from official records. She moved on, the lieutenants' voices fading into the background noise of the commissary. At the refrigerated section, a group of soldiers laughed as they grabbed sodas. One, a specialist, noticed the lieutenants and snapped a salute. "Morning, sirs," he said, his tone brisk. "At ease," Bryce replied, then nodded toward Lena. "What do you make of that relic?" The specialist glanced at her jacket, his smile mirroring their amusement. "Retro vibes, sir. Almost authentic." "Almost," Harrow echoed, his voice carrying. "That's the key word." Lena closed the fridge door, adding a carton of eggs to her basket. Her knee ached from standing too long, a reminder of injuries she'd learned to mask. She headed to the checkout, her limp more pronounced now. Behind her, Harrow's voice grew bolder. "Classic case of stolen valor," he said, not bothering to lower his volume. "Bet she's headed to the VA to scam some benefits." Lena's destination was indeed the Veteran Services Office, but not for the reasons they assumed. At noon, she had an appointment to resubmit paperwork for medical claims tied to operations that existed only in classified files. 3 prior attempts had been denied, each rejection citing a lack of verifiable records. At the counter, the cashier, a retired sergeant major with a faded anchor tattoo, scanned her items. His eyes lingered on the worn patch on her jacket, recognizing something the younger soldiers missed. He said nothing, just rang up her total. Lena paid in cash, counting out bills from a slim wallet. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, the first words she'd spoken all morning. She gathered her bags and headed to the customer service desk to confirm her address for the VA appointment. Another bureaucratic hurdle, another formality that never seemed to stick in the system. Behind her, the lieutenants reached the checkout, their banter uninterrupted. The line moved slowly, and Lena overheard snippets of their conversation as she approached the desk. "Alicia," read the name tag of the clerk, who offered a practiced smile. "How can I assist you?" "I need to verify my current address for my records," Lena said, sliding her ID across the counter. "Of course," Alicia replied, typing quickly. "Active duty or dependent?" "Veteran," Lena said. She knew what came next. "I'll need your VA card or DD-214 form, please." Lena sighed inwardly, pulling a folder from her jacket. "My service records are classified. I have a letter from the Department of Defense." She handed over the documents, their edges worn from repeated use. Alicia frowned, clearly unaccustomed to such cases. "I'm sorry, we need standard documentation. Let me get my supervisor." As Alicia stepped away, Lena heard the lieutenants behind her. "Some people will do anything for a discount," Bryce muttered. The supervisor, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, appeared and skimmed the papers. "These don't meet our verification requirements," she said curtly. "You'll need standard proof of service." "These are the only documents I'm authorized to carry," Lena said, her voice calm despite the frustration simmering beneath. "The VA sent me here to sync my address with base records before my appointment." The supervisor shook her head. "You'll have to take it up with the main VA office." Lena tucked the folder back into her jacket, her fingers brushing a small, heavy object. A challenge coin, not the kind sold in gift shops, but one earned in shadows. "Thank you for your time," she said quietly, turning to leave. The lieutenant's smirks followed her, their whispers now joined by a specialist who'd lingered to listen. "Typical," Harrow said. "Puts on an old uniform, spins a tale about secret missions. No one can check it." The crowd parted as Lena approached the exit, her bags in hand. The automatic doors slid open, revealing the bright sunlight, and a figure in a pristine uniform adorned with 3 stars. Lieutenant General Evelyn Porter stepped into the commissary, her aide trailing with a tablet. Her presence commanded the room, her dark hair cropped short, her gaze sharp as she reviewed a report. "I want those logistics projections by 1400, she told her aide. "No excuses." Lena stepped aside, instinctively lowering her eyes as most civilians did in the presence of high brass. She was nearly past when General Porter's gaze flicked up, then froze, her eyes locked on the faint outline of the patch on Lena's jacket, a symbol so faded only someone who knew its significance would recognize it. The general's posture stiffened, her report forgotten as she handed it to her aide without breaking eye contact. The aide hesitated, sensing the shift. The commissary's chatter faded as soldiers and staff noticed the general's reaction. With deliberate precision, General Porter raised her hand in a formal salute. Lena froze, her bag suddenly heavy. A salute in a civilian setting was unheard of, a breach of protocol that drew every eye. The general held the gesture, unwavering. The lieutenants fell silent, their earlier mockery replaced by confusion. Lena shifted her bags to her left hand and returned the salute, her movement smooth despite the ache in her shoulder. Years of muscle memory took over, transforming her from a weary veteran to a soldier once more. "Major Caldwell," General Porter said, her voice cutting through the hush. "Spectre Unit, Operation Night Vale, 2001. It was both a statement and a question, heavy with recognition. "Yes, ma'am," Lena replied, her voice firm now. "That was me." The general lowered her salute, and Lena followed. The commissary was a vacuum of sound, all attention on the exchange between a three-star general and a woman in a tattered jacket. The commissary stood frozen, the hum of activity replaced by a tense silence. General Porter's gaze held Lena's, her expression a mix of respect and something deeper, like a memory stirred from a long-sealed vault. She gestured sharply to her aide. "Wait outside," she said, her tone brooking no argument. The aide nodded, retreating with a quick glance at Lena, as if trying to piece together the puzzle of her presence. The crowd parted further, soldiers and staff shifting to give the two women space, their curiosity palpable. "Major Caldwell," General Porter said again, her voice softer now but carrying the weight of shared history. "Your unit carved the path that got my team out. Night Vale 2001. 3 choppers down, hostiles closing in. You and your people opened the corridor that saved 28 of us." She paused, her eyes flicking to the faded patch on Lena's jacket, its outline barely a whisper of the Spectre unit's insignia. That operation never made it into any official report. A logistical error, they called it. Lena nodded, the memories flooding back unbidden, grains of sand stinging her face, the roar of rotor blades faltering in a storm, the crackle of gunfire as her 6-person team fought to secure an escape route for a stranded diplomatic convoy. She pushed the images down, her voice steady. "That was the point, ma'am. It had to stay buried." The general's lips pressed into a thin line, acknowledging the truth. Around them, the lieutenants, Bryce and Harrow, stood rooted, their earlier smirks gone, replaced by pale discomfort. The specialist who joined their mockery shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between Lena and the general. The weight of their misjudgment hung heavy in the air. General Porter tilted her head toward the commissary's small coffee corner, a cluster of tables tucked near a window. "May I buy you a coffee, Major?" she asked, her tone formal yet warm. "Of course, ma'am," Lena replied, falling back on old discipline. They moved toward the corner, the crowd parting silently, a mix of awe and curiosity in their stares. The lieutenants remained frozen, their postures rigid with shame. A young private at the coffee counter snapped to attention as the general approached, nearly dropping his notepad in his haste to take their order. "Black coffee," General Pousset said curtly. "Same," Lena added, her voice quiet but clear. The private scurried off, and General Porter leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped on the table. "I've wondered for years what happened to your team after the debrief," she said. "The files were locked down so tight even I couldn't get access. Triple-layered classification, mission details, personnel, even your unit's existence. All compartmentalized. That was by design, ma'am," Lena said, her eyes tracing the grain of the table. "Spectre unit operated in fragments. No one person held the full picture, not even us. It kept things contained." The general nodded, her expression grim. That mission stopped a diplomatic disaster from spiraling into war. But the cost? She trailed off, her gaze distant for a moment before refocusing on Lena. "What brings you to Camp Haverford? Our records show you retired to Wyoming." "Medical claim," Lena said, her professional mask hiding the exhaustion of years spent battling bureaucracy. My knee and shoulder took hits during Night Vale. The medical records exist, but they're classified so deeply the VA can't touch them. General Porter's face hardened, a flicker of anger in her eyes. And you can't mention the mission without breaching protocol. A perfect catch-22. Yes, ma'am, Lena said, her voice steady but laced with quiet frustration. I've been trying to get the records partially declassified for years. 3 rejections so far. The general leaned back, her fingers tapping the table once, decisively. That ends today. She pulled out her phone, her movements precise, and dialed. This is General Porter. I need immediate action on a personnel matter. A pause. Yes, that clearance level. Authorization code Bravo. 7 Kilo 22 Victor. Another pause, her eyes narrowing. I want all records related to Spectre Unit's Night Vale operation, 2001. Declassified for medical purposes. Top priority. Override any conflicting protocols. That's a direct order. She hung up, slipping the phone back into her pocket, and met Lena's gaze. Bureaucracy moves like molasses, especially with declassification. But my office will push this through. Your service deserves better than being buried in red tape. Thank you, ma'am, Lena said, her voice soft but thick with emotion. The acknowledgement, after so many years of silence, felt like a weight lifting, if only slightly. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Lieutenants Bryce and Harrow. Their earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by stiff formality. They stopped a respectful distance away, standing at attention. Ma'am, permission to speak? Bryce asked, his voice tight. General Porter glanced at Lena, who gave a slight nod. Granted, the general said. Bryce turned to Lena, his face flushed with shame. Ma'am, I want to sincerely apologize for my disrespectful behavior. There's no excuse for what we said or how we acted. Harrow stepped forward, his voice quieter but earnest. We failed to uphold the values of the officer corps, ma'am. We disrespected a soldier, especially one who served in covert operations. It was shameful. Lena studied them for a moment, seeing not just their embarrassment, but the potential beneath it. They were young, green, but not beyond redemption. You couldn't have known, she said evenly. That was the point of units like mine. We worked in the dark so others could operate in the open. That doesn't justify our actions, Bryce said, his jaw tight. We judged you by appearances without understanding what we were seeing. A lesson best learned early, General Porter interjected, her tone sharp enough to make it clear the incident wouldn't be forgotten, though their apology was accepted. Back to your duties. Yes, ma'am, the lieutenant said in unison, saluting before retreating. The commissary slowly returned to its rhythm, but the atmosphere had shifted. Veterans passing by offered subtle nods or brief salutes, their earlier indifference replaced by respect. Word of the exchange was spreading, a ripple through the base. General Porter sipped her coffee, her eyes returning to Lena's jacket. That's not standard Spectre gear, she noted. Your team wore modified urban camo during Night Vale. Lena's fingers brushed the worn fabric, a gesture heavy with memory. It belonged to Colonel Tara Hensley, our commander. She didn't make it out of that operation. I've kept it ever since. The general's expression softened, understanding the weight of the gesture. Hensley was one of the finest officers I ever met. I was never briefed on how she died. Ambush, Lena said quietly. She held the line alone to give us time to get the diplomatic team to the secondary extraction point. Her last order was to keep moving. And you've carried her jacket all these years, General Porter said. Not a question but a statement, her voice thick with respect. What about the patch? I'm surprised it's still visible, given the classification. Lena's lips curved faintly, a rare smile. Time took care of that, ma'am. It's so worn now. Only someone who knows what to look for would recognize it. The originals stored away, with the rest of the memories. Some things don't need physical reminders, the general said softly, her eyes meeting Lena's. The bustle of the commissary faded into the background, but curious glances lingered, drawn to the quiet intensity of their conversation. The customer service supervisor approached cautiously, her earlier bureaucratic demeanor replaced by deference. "General Porter, ma'am," she said, her voice hesitant. "I want to apologize for the earlier issue. If there's anything we can do for Major Caldwell, it would be our honor." "Thank you," the general replied, her tone firm but not unkind. "The Major's matter will be handled at a higher level today." "Of course, ma'am," the supervisor said, retreating with a nod. General Porter glanced at her watch. "I have a meeting in 15 minutes. After that, come to my office. We need to discuss ensuring you get the recognition and care you're owed. This isn't just about protocol, it's about righting a wrong." "It's not necessary, ma'am," Lena began, but the general cut her off. "It is," Porter said firmly. "What your team did saved lives, including mine. The secrecy was necessary, but it shouldn't deny you proper care or acknowledgement. Some debts can't stay hidden." Lena nodded, the weight of the general's words settling deep. As they rose from the table, the commissary's rhythm resumed, but the air felt different, charged with a new respect, a recognition that something extraordinary had been revealed in the ordinary chaos of a military morning. 3 months later, Lena Caldwell stepped through the automatic doors of the Camp Haverford commissary, the morning sun casting long shadows across the base. The familiar cadence of drill commands and the distant hum of vehicles filled the air as recruits marched in sync and flags rippled against a clear sky. The scene was unchanged. Soldiers hurrying to their posts, veterans lingering over coffee. Yet for Lena, everything felt different. Her navy blue jacket, once faded and frayed, had been carefully cleaned, its fabric restored as much as time allowed. The Spectre unit patch above her heart, now subtly restitched, gleamed faintly, a quiet testament to a past no longer entirely hidden. Pinned below it was a new addition, a presidential unit citation, its polished surface catching the light. Lena's steps were steadier now, her left knee responding to the physiotherapy that had finally begun after General Porter's intervention. The Veteran Affairs Office, spurred by the General's direct order, had partially declassified her medical records, unlocking the care she'd fought for over years of rejections. The treatments were slowly rebuilding strength in her leg and shoulder, though some limitations would always remain. As she moved through the commissary, the sidelong glances of curiosity or judgment were gone, replaced by nods of recognition from soldiers and staff alike. Word of her service had spread, a quiet legend taking root in the base's collective memory. At the checkout, a familiar face greeted her, the retired sergeant major with the anchor tattoo, now wearing a veteran's cap tilted slightly back. "Good to see you, Major Caldwell," he said, scanning her groceries with a warm smile. "Heard your story's part of the training curriculum now. General Porter pushed it through herself." Lena's eyebrows lifted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Is that so?" "Yep," he said, bagging her items. "They're teaching recruits about snap judgments, respect for covert operatives, the works. Your Night Vale op is a case study, stripped of classified details, of course." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Some of us had a hunch about that patch, you know. Never asked, though. Figured you'd talk if you wanted to." "Thank you for that," Lena said, her voice soft but genuine. Discretion had been her shield for so long that open acknowledgement still felt foreign, like stepping into unfamiliar terrain. She paid for her groceries, her wallet a little less strained now that her medical claims were being processed. As she turned to leave, a young officer approached, her boots polished to a mirror shine, her posture rigid with the earnestness of new rank. Lieutenant Mara Ellison, no more than 26, wore the insignia of the 214th Intelligence Battalion. She saluted crisply. Major Caldwell, from the Spectre unit? That's me, Lena replied, returning the salute with practiced ease. At ease, Lieutenant. How can I help you? Ma'am, I'm studying your extraction tactics as part of advanced training, Ellison said, her voice steady but tinged with awe. Parts of the Night Vale operation are now in our field manuals. Your strategies for low-resource extractions are standard protocol. I was wondering... She hesitated, then pressed on. Would you consider speaking to my platoon? Your experience would mean a lot. Lena paused, the weight of 20 years of silence pressing against this new openness. She saw in Ellison the same fire that had driven her own team. Curiosity, grit, a hunger to learn. I'd be happy to, within classification limits, she said finally. Set it up, and I'll be there. Ellison's face lit up. Thank you, ma'am. That's incredible. They exchanged contact details, and as the lieutenant walked away, Lena felt a quiet pride, not for the missions or the medals, but for the chance to pass on what her team had learned through blood and loss. Outside, the base buzzed with its usual rhythm, but Lena's place in it had shifted. She paused near the flagpole, the stars and stripes snapping in the breeze, and adjusted the citation pin on her jacket. The weight of it felt strange, a tangible marker of a life she'd kept hidden for so long. As she stood there, General Porter approached, her 3-star insignia glinting in the sunlight, her aide trailing a step behind. Major Caldwell, Porter greeted, her tone warm but professional Juanmei system. The artifact was cut off mid-sentence due to reaching the character limit. Here's the continuation to complete the artifact. Formal. Just the person I was hoping to see. General, Lena said, nodding respectfully. How can I assist, ma'am? I've been tracking the declassification process, Porter said, her voice businesslike but kind. There's an update you'll want to hear. We've located the family of Sergeant Elias Morrow. Lena's breath caught. Morrow, her team's comms specialist, the one who held the radio link through that brutal night in 2001, ensuring the extraction team could find them. He hadn't made it out. The memory of his voice, steady despite the chaos, flickered in her mind. His daughter's in her early 20s now, Porter continued. She grew up believing he died in a training accident. With the partial declassification, we can finally honor his sacrifice. She'll receive his Silver Star next month. Lena absorbed the news quietly, picturing Morrow's quick grin, his knack for keeping the team grounded. His daughter deserved to know the truth, even if the full story remained locked away. That means a lot, ma'am, she said softly. More than you know. We'd be honored if you'd attend the ceremony, Porter added. As the last surviving member of your team, your presence would mean the world to his family. I'll be there, ma'am, Lena said, her voice steady. It's an honor. Porter nodded, her eyes lingering on the restored patch. It suits you, Major. Always has. She glanced at her watch. I've got a briefing to prep for, but one more thing. We're developing a training program for high-stakes extractions. Your expertise would be invaluable. Think about it. Yes, ma'am, Lena said, though teaching wasn't her forte. The idea of shaping the next generation, passing on lessons forged in the crucible of Night Vale, felt like a new kind of mission. As Porter headed toward the command building, Lena walked to her car, her thoughts drifting to her team. To Colonel Hensley, whose jacket she wore like a second skin. To Sergeant Morrow, whose sacrifice would finally be recognized. To Lieutenants Vance and Kessler, who'd survived the mission, but succumbed to their wounds and illnesses in the years that followed. For so long, Lena had carried their stories alone, the sole keeper of a history written in shadows. Now, pieces of that history were stepping into the light, acknowledged, preserved, taught. At her car, Lena loaded her groceries into the trunk, catching her reflection in the window. The woman staring back stood taller, her shoulders squared, the patch and citation pin gleaming in the morning sun. For the first time in decades, a real smile touched her lips. reaching her eyes. She wasn't invisible anymore, no longer caught between worlds. The covert missions would always be part of her, but they no longer defined her entirely. She'd stepped into a space between shadow and light, where her service was honored, where her team's lessons could guide those who came next. Driving away from Camp Haverford, Lena began mentally preparing for her talk with Lieutenant Ellison's platoon. There were stories to share, wisdom to impart, a legacy to uphold. After 20 years of silence, she finally had a voice, and something worth saying.